Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do on most Sundays. I believe you may be able to see Holly back here in the background wandering around as she loves to do back here in the garden. Lucky that my 14-year-old Husky mix is gentle back here. She generally takes the paths, but she'll cut through and stand on the occasional thing as well. Everything is waking up in the garden as we would expect, but we have had, I think, 6 nights that have been at or below freezing here in the last week and a half or so. And so it's definitely burned back some of the new foliage on a few things, but overall, not any real damage. Some of these early spring flowering things are just vulnerable to that year to year. So not a lot of worry. Most of the perennials that have broken the ground are only up about 2, 3, 4 inches. And so being that close to the ground, there's a little more heat down there. So not a lot of damage. The content, let me see, videos that went up this week. There should be a video on, from a tour video from a friend's who is a retired landscape designer. One of the first videos that I'm doing over at her house, and some projects that I actually installed there 30 years ago, a retaining wall and a sidewalk that I redid from an existing concrete sidewalk, lifted it up, busted it into large pieces, and rearranged them to look like a stone patio. And let's see what else. A tour video from here, just giving some updates. The house is about to have fairly major construction going on around it, and a couple of the areas around there I haven't really finished some of the landscaping around on purpose because I knew I was going to have construction. I did a lot of the original work here, but there's some fascia work and some other things that need to be done on the front of this house that I just feel like should be done by a person who as a full-time who does this work full-time, and not me learning as I go about the roof, working on the roof. I'm capable of a lot of things. I had the nursery. When you're a nurseryman, you have to be an electrician, you have to be a plumber, you have to be a welder, you have to be, I got a train back here making a lot of noise. You have to be all of those things. And so I built the office at my nursery and, did the plumbing and the septic and, literally everything, because that's what you have to do, as a poor farmer, basically, is to learn every trade. But I learned every trade just enough, to do a shed, not necessarily enough to do some of the work on there. So there's construction hopefully starting pretty soon out here. Just depends on, how fast they can get to it. So that was a video this week. And I'm sure something else as well will have gone up. And all about zinnia video should have gone up from seed to finish, and how to maintain zinnias in the landscape. They're one of our kind of go-to flowers for getting pollinators into the garden. The Learn to Garden video series should have had a video about planting. Hopefully I've gotten that up before you guys see this video on just how to plant a shrub, just going over really basic things about that. This next week, I'm going to be out in Santa Barbara for a plant show, some new things coming to the trade, and I may shoot a special video for that Learn to Garden channel for that. And I'll be shooting some other content for the main channel as well, but I probably will do something, some sort of walk around video just for the Learn to Garden video series, and there's a discount code down below this video for that, if you're interested. Okay. Let's get to some questions after a lot of introductory words from Jim. So somebody got some little 1-quart hollies. I don't know what variety, and they've been eaten by deer, and they thought that hollies were deer resistant. Some hollies are more deer resistant than others. So like our Yopon holly, one of our native hollies here, it tends to be a bit more resistant, but not all hollies are completely resistant. And keep in mind, if it just happened during the winter time, a lot of things that we consider deer resistant, a hungry deer might eat in the winter time. If it's they run out of choices, right? Because there's not, if you go into the forest back here, not a lot of evergreen choices, that they'll eat. They don't like English ivy. And so looking back here, there's a little Chinese privet, back there, and there's a few things for them to eat back there. But you know, even the things that they don't necessarily like, you know, unfortunately by the end of winter might come up higher on their list. But hollies I don't consider all that deer resistant, except for, but there are some that are more so, that you know, you may want to do some research. I don't know what area you were in, on which ones might be a little more deer resistant. Somebody asked if Western Arborvitae are more deer resistant than Eastern Arborvitae. The Eastern Arborvitae, like Emerald Arborvitae, if you've ever seen, the deer come up to them and eat them up into what looks like you know, funny little pom-pom trees that they can turn them into. It's really, when I see it, I'm sure it's not funny to the person who owns them, where the deer have eaten the bottom of them out. But to a person just driving by, it's actually, you know, it turns them into Dr. Seuss trees. Is what they do. Yes, the Western Arborvitae are a lot more deer resistant, and that's true of a lot of things that evolved out west. I mean, you know, the plants that evolve out in the west have to have defenses against animals eating them, against deer, against horses, donkeys, rabbits, anything that you know, any herbivore that's going to come along and eat you. You better have a defense against it, because there's not necessarily water or nutrients or, you know, whatever you need to grow back very quickly, so you can't recover from it. So everything out there develops thorns and funky smells and oils and, you know, all kinds of things as defenses against herbivores. So yes, the Western Arborvitae, but it doesn't mean they can't destroy them other ways. They can destroy your green giant Arborvitae, which is a Western Arborvitae, by rubbing them, and, you know, lots of other ways. And again, like I said already, a hungry deer, you know, will eat anything. But in general, yes, Western arbs are more deer resistant than Eastern arbs. Okay, somebody lives in Gainesville, Georgia, and they've got variegated pittosporum. That's probably zone 8A. They got variegated pittosporum, which I have several pittosporum in this garden, and they look dead, and they wondered if they should not try to grow them. Maybe they were in zone 7B. If they should not try to regrow them. I think a really established one would not have been hurt by that cold, and that's basically what I've seen. If I go over to the Ralston Arboretum, older pittosporum of all different species, so Tobira and several others. I actually have a couple of other species of pittosporum in containers and things that I've never shown on the channel. The established ones don't seem to have any impact whatsoever, but my Wheeler's Dwarf Pittosporum has a little browning on it. My Mojo Pittosporum back there have a tiny bit of browning on them, but they're pretty well protected in the understory back here, so not bad. But I think if I'd had those out in open space in the wind, being as small and as young as they are, they would have probably been damaged. So it's an age as much as anything related thing, I believe. And so as long as that didn't happen, if you replanted them, if they're dead, I think you would, if you got a winter or two under them, they would not have been as impacted. The Garden Plants channel probably had, the Garden Plants with Jim Putnam channel, which is just another YouTube channel that I've started. It's just individual plants. I know I say this a lot, but there's new people watching this video all the time, so I want to make sure that you're subscribed over there as well. I think there's 7,000 subscribers or something already, so thank you very much for that. I put up individual plant videos on there, so just going over individual plants. I know we shot a double flowering Carya japonica the other day, and a couple other things this week. Something else, just, I don't even remember now, but those videos will be going up soon. So there's video content going up on that channel every week, but it's just called Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. You can search it on YouTube, or you can search it on Google, wherever, and it'll pull up that channel. Okay. So somebody has 4 Pieris japonica, and one has mites and looks stressed. It's in a slightly different place. It's like in more sun, I think, and the other 3 are in a little more shade. I have mine back here in the part shade. And again, if you have mites on anything, that plant is sending out signals that it's sick. And mites are like on this planet to destroy sick plants, to get them out as quick as possible before that plant sickens something else, if that makes any sense. And so, if you're having ongoing mite problems, which you'll see a lot on your house plants, because you don't have enough light on them, or you're overwatering them or whatever, tend to be in lots of mite problems indoors. Outdoors, we see a little less on the mite problems, but it's always stress related. So they're being overwatered, underwatered, too much sun, too much shade, not a plant that will grow in your area. there's a lot of, some conifers that get mite problems because they're being sold in zone 8 at Christmas time, and because they're shaped like little Christmas trees, and they go in the ground and they get mites, and they're getting mites because they don't like 103 degrees. So that's what's going on. So yeah, if you have one and it is in a separate space in the question, then that's obviously what it is. I'd move it to where the other ones are. You might move it out of that spot into a container, let it get back growing again. And so you don't, just don't take a plant with mites and put it next to the other ones, because if they are stressed in some way, it might, might initially cause some harm. I don't know, but I'm not going to tell you to move a plant with mites to 3 that don't. Maybe put it in a container, move it a little ways away, get it growing again, and then put it with the others. Okay. So several folks said last week. I said several people had asked if I was left-handed, and yes, I am left-handed. But I throw with a right hand and do all kinds of other things. And a lot of people said that was ambidextrous, but ambidextrous means you can do something equally as well with your left or right hand. And I write like a 2-year-old with my right hand, so that's not really ambidextrous. I think it's what do they call? They call it mixed-handedness or something like that. Is actually what it's called. But similar. And then somebody said I'm amphibious, and I think that comes from, there's a basketball player named Charles Shackelford that played on the 1983 NC State men's basketball national championship team right down the street here. And he said in an interview, because he was so great shooting with his left and right hand, that he was amphibious. So somebody said that as well. I think as a kid, you might have thought I was amphibious because it was impossible to get me to come out of the ocean or the swimming pool. So as a kid, I seem to be amphibious, equally at home in the water as on land, but not as an adult so much. Okay, let's see. So somebody's neighbor is spraying vinegar to kill weeds, and they've killed a plant, I guess, right on the property line of theirs, that's theirs. Wanted to know if there was anything they could plant there that the vinegar wouldn't kill. Unfortunately, it depends on the percentage vinegar they're using. If you're using like that 30% vinegar, and I did a video on how good vinegar was at killing weeds on the channel back at the old house. So it would have been right at 3 years ago or so, if you want to go back and look that video up. The answer in that video is it does okay. It'll kill some. You have to spray most things at least twice, and things like liriope and things that have any kind of stored energy under the ground will just keep coming back. It just burns the foliage off, but doesn't kill, down below that very well. It looks like scorched earth immediately. Like tomorrow, everything's brown when you spray it, but doesn't necessarily kill the plant completely. But I think anything you put there that got sprayed with that vinegar is going to at least look bad. So that's the answer. I don't think, you can't kill liriope with that stuff. I mean, liriope will just die to the ground and come back, die to the ground and come back, unless it was like a really crazy percentage of vinegar in it. I guess it would eventually kill it if you sprayed it 8 times in a row, but that's what it takes. But it would just look terrible. So me saying, well, he probably couldn't kill liriope with it, it would still look awful all the time. So the answer is to get your neighbor to not spray, your stuff. I don't really know the answer to that. Okay, so somebody's Gara, this is a good question, is coming up, and it's got red spots on the leaves, and they wanted to know what that was. That's actually a cold related thing. A lot of these perennials that are waking up too early this year, so Gara is like whirling butterflies. Great perennial, have several of them planted here in the landscape. Great for pollinators, kind of a wispy perennial that blows around in the wind some. Some of these perennials are waking up so early, they're getting some cold on them. That cold is affecting how they're able to uptake nutrients, how they're able to, they're just up too early. And so that red spotting on that Gara is in all likelihood cool nights. As soon as it warms up, the foliage should be normal. Let's see. So somebody has frost damaged leaves on their hydrangeas, and I've got hydrangea macrophylla over here that's definitely lost the flowers. Probably lost the flowers back in the December freeze. If I didn't then, I lost them in the 28-degree night the other night. Wanted to know if they should prune them off. No reason to. That thing will leaf out so quickly. Those leaves will be in distant memory within a couple of weeks. Maybe, a couple weeks from now after it's leafed back out, if you see one or two that's unappealing, you can just literally walk by and pull them off at that point. But no real reason to go in there and and worry about it because the new foliage will grow so fast. Okay, where do I dispose of weeds? I have a giant pile back here that will eventually be a compost pile, but I've just been piling stuff back here. It's not attractive. It's next to a greenhouse that I talked about finishing in a video this past week, but it's just in a pile back here, and it's in a shady enough space where none of the seed from those weeds would actually germinate. So, you know, but the seed is still there and would come up if I moved it into the bed. So I need to get it. I need to get that compost heated up, and that, you know, to kill that. Okay, somebody asked how far apart to plant moon dance hydrangeas because they want a small hedge. I had put my white weddings back here about 3 feet apart. I think you could do the same thing with moon dance. You could go as wide as 4 feet if you wanted to, but probably if you're trying to create like a dense hedged line of them, I'd probably go as close as 3 feet, maybe 3.5. You know, just to split the difference. Okay, so and then somebody asked, what hand do I prune with? Because this would actually answer the question. This is the one I'm ambidextrous on. This is the one, sometimes I pick up a pair of pruners and then I go, what hand do I use? I've got some left-handed and right-handed fiskars in here, and I can use either one of them. And that just comes from, that's not because I was originally ambidextrous, just because my left hand would get tired sometimes doing cuttings when we were from May 15th to the 1st of July doing, you know, 150, 200,000 cuttings of plants, rooting them, and my hand would get tired and I just flip over to my right hand, so that they just became kind of equally as good. But that is the one area I am ambidextrous, is pruning. Okay, so somebody asked anything that will grow up under established oak trees or close to them, something that would be large and evergreen. Mahonia will definitely work if you're in an area that Mahonia is hardy. You know, I've seen Mahonia doing that. Any shade shrub that you can water for some period of time under the tree will eventually adapt to it. Even something like Alyssium can grow under there, but initially it's really going to not like it. So you're going to need to water it, keep an eye on it. Alyssium's good at wilting and letting you know it's dry. But everything on this back line back here, Akuba is a good example of that. Initially, it probably won't like it, but it will adapt to it. My whole neighborhood is basically an oak savanna out here with giant, you know, 80-foot tall white oaks all over the neighborhood. And people do have things planted under them, evergreen shrubs like azaleas and, you know, camellias and other things. But again, initially you're going to have to give it some water. It's going to take a couple years for it to be able to compete well with the oak. And you need to buy small containers because it might be hard to find a spot between the roots to actually plant something. So smaller containers probably a good idea. Okay, so this was a funny question. If I could only buy one plant for the garden, what would it be? And the reason they asked this question, they had 20% off coupon for one plant at a garden center near them. And I think it was in Alabama. So I don't know if it was on 7B or 8B. Alabama's got up pretty wide from the mountains in the top, the foothills of the Appalachians up in the very top down to the Gulf is pretty big temperature change, pretty big range in there. You know, that was a good question. I might buy something I could divide later so that I could make more than one. You know, it might be a fancy hosta or something like that, so I could divide it and make more later. But if it was one shrub, I'd probably go camellia. I mean, I'm probably, of all the things, and I don't have a crazy camellia collection here just because I can't collect a lot of any one thing in this very small lot. But I do have, if we're counting camellias, 1, 2, 3 behind me, 1 beside the porch is 4, 3, 4 in the front garden. So I have 8, maybe 8 minimum, 9. There's another one back behind the camera. So I have at least 9 camellias. So I may have the most of any one particular thing would be camellia. So a camellia for me, I guess, if I could only buy one. So somebody asked, do I add compost to new plantings and established plants? They just wanted to know if how I use compost in an ongoing way. The only things that I recompost in this garden are where I'm standing. There's an annual border around this turf, which will be a patio, and the same thing in the front garden. and then the vegetable garden gets recomposted. So the only things that are getting recomposted are annual beds. And annual bed, you know, I consider vegetables annuals as well. I've got the trash truck beeping. You can probably hear it backing down the road. So that's the only things I'm recomposting. The beds out here where the shrubs are and the perennials are, trees are, that got initially composted, and now I'm just mulching, and the leaves are back here. Everything's just breaking down and becoming humus and compost. So my compost is being replaced by my mulch being broken down. So I won't add anything to a hole back here additionally, and I won't add any additional compost. So the funny thing about what just happened was that was the city truck that backs down the road here and picks up people's yard waste and then takes it to the city dump and then turns it into mulch or compost or whatever. You know, driving, you know, thousands of gallons of diesel fuel out of the trucks, you know, on a, you know, weekly basis in order to pick up all this refuse and drive it somewhere and then bring it. You know, these people then take a trailer and go over there and buy it back. It's just, while I answer a question about compost, you know, it's just really, I don't know why it struck me as kind of funny, you know, or, you know, we try not to let any of that stuff leave this lot. You know, it's all valuable material that, again, is breaking down and becoming humus and compost and, you know, what I need for these plants to grow back here without having to add any in the future. And then again, we are currently bringing in some compost. I've got some soil cube compost on the driveway out here for the vegetable garden and new annual beds. Eventually, I got to get that pile, the giant pile, ugly pile back there working for me, you know, so I don't have to bring anything in the future. What hydrangea to cover from frost? The only ones you would cover from frost are probably like oak leaf hydrangeas and hydrangea macrophylla, which is the big leaf hydrangeas. Those are the ones that the flower buds are on already through the winter and are most vulnerable. I don't think for a lot of us we're going to see a lot of great flowers on either one, just because it was I've got 2 oak leaf hydrangeas out here I think have been killed to the ground because they were small. I mean, completely killed to the ground. I see them coming back up, but they're only coming from the ground, and there's definitely no flower buds on that. And my hydrangea macrophyllus, I think that December freeze probably got them. I am still throwing a cover over it when it was down at 28 degrees. 28 degrees is like the temperature that I really worry about. You know, 32 is obviously freezing, but if somebody tells me it's going to be 31 degrees, it's probably only going to be below freezing for maybe an hour or 2, you know, whereas 28, you know, it's probably going to be below freezing for maybe 5-6 hours to go down to 28 and then back up to 32. So that's a lot. That period of time tends to kill more open flowers. So, you know, we had a couple 30s, a couple 31, you know, a couple 31s, and no damage at all. And then that 28 happened, and a lot of open flowers in this garden got killed. So, you know, I think it's that amount of time as much as anything that was below freezing. Okay, somebody ordered a Chinese snowball viburnum, wanted to know what mine looked like right now. It's well leafed out at this point. It went a little more deciduous than normal. Chinese snowball viburnum we consider evergreen in the South, but you know, mine, because of that December freeze, lost a few more leaves, but it's well leafed out. It's actually about to open inflorescence on it, a big white ball of flowers pretty soon. And theirs still seems dormant or dead. It depends on where it came from. It may have come from someplace that was slightly colder maybe and just hasn't woken up. If it's still pliable, meaning you can bend it and it doesn't break, then it's probably still alive, and I would give it some time. But if it doesn't pretty soon, I don't know what the guarantee from that place was. So you might want to make sure you're not going past the guarantee. But scratch it with your thumb, see if it's green under the stem, bend it a little bit. But mine is, I can see right now probably 5 or 6 inches of new growth on it, and flowers are forming on it. So somebody said, okay, so last question for this week. Thank you guys for participating. There's something like 21 on here that I had written down, and there's so many great questions. I could probably do this video 3 or 4 times a week, honestly, and still get great questions from you guys. So I appreciate that. Last question for this week. Somebody asked me to just talk about wisteria. Okay, so I don't know what they wanted me to talk about wisteria about, and then somebody said how invasive it was as the next comment, and then that person came back with, they were actually asking if they could grow one in a container. It had to be a pretty big container to grow most wisterias in. I think when we think about wisteria, most people are thinking about the Chinese wisteria that we kind of see taking over everything. So if you see wisteria growing up a tree and just strangling it to death, in all likelihood that's Chinese wisteria, which is Wisteria sinensis, and it's obviously an invasive. But we do have an American wisteria, frutescens, Wisteria frutescens. And there's a variety called Amethyst Falls. I have a video on the channel for it, but that's our native, that's one of the named cultivars of our native wisteria. So we do have native wisteria, and just like any other vine, it will probably can do some damage to a tree, but it's far less aggressive. They wanted to know if they could tree form one. Amethyst Falls is definitely the one to use as a tree form. It's less aggressive in the landscape. Again, a native plant, and so probably, I don't know. They're both just cousins that got separated because land divided and went, in different ways, or birds carried seed, or whatever the heck happened. They are very close cousins. I mean, if you can look at, if you didn't know exactly what to look for, you'd have a hard time telling the difference between Wisteria frutescens, which is our native, frutescens, or Wisteria sinensis, and then oh gosh, the Japanese wisteria is Wisteria floribunda. I think it's Wisteria floribunda. The Japanese wisteria has a much longer, lacy flower on it. So if you ever see tunnels, of wisteria, that's normally going to be done with Japanese wisteria because it has a much longer, narrower, slender cluster of flowers. They're both in the pea family. It's a pea family plant, so it has that traditional pea-shaped flower. If you're growing beans, peas, you'll see that flower. Red buds are in that pea family. They all have a similar flower on them. There's right up the street here, there's a Chinese wisteria eating a red bud, and I'm always thinking that it's a pea killing a pea. Really, so the seeds will be in a pea-shaped pod, on anything in that pea family. So regardless of whether edible peas or wisteria, red buds, probably too much information for this particular question, but that's me speaking to wisteria. There is an American wisteria that you can purchase. Amethyst Falls is a good named cultivar that's pretty available. It can be tree formed. It could be kept in a large container probably for some period of time, but it eventually outgrow it. But you definitely would want to avoid the Chinese or Japanese wisteria, although the Japanese wisteria is quite beautiful if you've ever seen it used in a botanic garden or something like that. So thank you guys for watching, following along, asking questions. You can ask questions down in the comments below. And that's where I pick from each week. Thanks for following on. One bonus question for this week, I forgot I had written down. Somebody asked if all boxwoods smell like cat pee, because a lot of boxwoods do. English boxwoods, American boxwoods. If you get a little sunlight on them, certain warm days, they put out a very strong urine smell. They have them right up next to their door, and wondered if there were all boxwoods had that urine smell. Yes, but the Japanese and Korean boxwoods tend to have a slightly less of that urine smell than the than some of the others. So that's Buxus microphylla and Buxus seneca, I think, are the two species, Japanese and Korean boxwoods, although I can't really tell any difference between them. But there are boxwoods with a slightly less odor, but they still can have some of that odor. But that's one of the things that, again, is an evolutionary defense against things like herbivores coming along and eating them and that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons they have that off odor is for that reason.